All right. Hi, everyone. I'm going to start talking, but take your time, grab some drinks and food, and grab your seat. My name is Greer Luce. I'm the Curator of Education and Public Programs here. I've seen a lot of you over the last couple of weeks, so thank you for being here again. And thank you for joining us for the third program in our 2024 Grand Homes and Gardens series. And that series is called Stately Homes, Exploring U.S. Governors, Mansions, and Gardens. Tonight, we're traveling to the furthest location in our series, Hawaii. So we need some kind of warm weather vibes given the very cold day that we have here. Hawaii's governor's mansion, which is called Washington Place, is the only governor's residence in the States that was also home to a monarch. The story of the mansion and its inhabitants offers a look at into the indigenous past and present of Hawaii, while also tracing its colonial history. We have an excellent speaker joining us from Hawaii via Zoom tonight to take us through that story. Before I introduce our speaker, I'd like to once again thank our sponsors for this series and for tonight's program. First, I'd like to thank our wonderful series sponsor, Bryn Mawr Trust, who has joined us at every program in this series so far. And I'd like to invite Brian Taylor up to the stage to say a few words on behalf of Bryn Mawr Trust.
Thank you. Thank you, Greer. I'll be brief because I'm very excited to listen, to actually feel a little warmth from Hawaii through Zoom. So once again, my name is Brian Taylor. I'm the Wealth Director for the Princeton office of Bryn Mawr Trust. And as Greer mentioned, I'd also like to welcome you to this third of the four-part series of the Morven Grand Homes and Gardens Speaker Series. Tonight's Washington Place, the People's Home of Hawaii, was something that I circled on my calendar long ago when I knew we were having this series. So I'm really looking forward to this evening's program. As some of you may have heard me say a couple weeks ago, at Bryn Mawr Trust, really community is at the heart of everything we do. And we've been deeply rooted in our communities for almost 200 years. As I mentioned a few weeks ago, our decision to align with Morven really isn't just about the sponsorship. It's about fostering a deeper connection to the rich tapestry of our community. So this series, it really offers us a unique opportunity to delve into the narratives that have shaped our country's history. So as we begin the third of this four-part series, know that Bryn Mawr Trust is here because we believe in the importance of community, cultural preservation, and education. I'm looking forward to the stories tonight, getting the chance to marvel at the grandeur and celebrate the historical treasures like Washington Place that make our country truly extraordinary. So thank you all and enjoy the evening.
Thank you so much, Brian. Wonderful words yet again tonight. And thank you to Bryn Mawr Trust for making this series a reality for us. We're very grateful. Now I'd like to thank our sponsor for this evening's program featuring Hawaii, and our sponsor is Keller Williams Princeton Realty. To say a few words, I will now invite Nick Lopez, one of Morven's fabulous board members, to the stage to say a few words.
So I'm loud without the microphone, so that's why I didn't want to have it. I did wear a jacket today. Unfortunately, I did not bring a piece of paper, so I'm going to swing this. Keller Williams Princeton has been a sponsor for a number of years now. I was very excited to sponsor this one specifically. My family is Japanese American. My grandmother is from Brooklyn, but my uncles and my cousins, my aunts are all from Oahu. So we used to stay at the Ilikai, which is right up the street on Ala Moana Boulevard. Most summers I was surfing, boarding, or windsurfing with my cousins at the North Shore. So when I saw this come up, I was overly excited to be able to be a sponsor. The truth is, as much as we see it here on the mainland, aloha is not just a salutation. Aloha is the energy that connects all of us. It connects our families, our ohana, our communities. So again, as a realtor who really strives to help people with their journeys, I thought that this was a perfect thing to be able to sponsor. So thank you so much for being here. Now, on a side note, as a board of trustee at Morven, please be a member. This is a fantastic institution. It's because of memberships and support of the community as well that we're able to have this fantastic establishment and everything that's coming. So again, thank you so much. Aloha and mahalo.
That's awesome, Nick. Thank you so much. So it is now my pleasure to introduce our speaker for tonight's program. Travis Hancock serves as the Curator of Washington Place in Honolulu, Hawaii. He is also a PhD candidate in history, defending his dissertation next week. Good luck, Travis. And then his dissertation will be defended through the University of Utah. He has an MA in American Studies from the University of Hawaii at Manoa and a BA in Classics from the University of Puget Sound. Prior to working for the state of Hawaii at Washington Place, he worked for the National Council on Public History and held positions at the Natural History Museum of Utah, the Desert Botanical Garden in Phoenix, and the Honolulu Museum of Art. He was born and raised on Oahu's North Shore and currently lives on the island's South Shore in Palula Valley. Please join me in welcoming Travis.
All right, aloha everybody, aloha mai kako, and mahalo nui loa for this opportunity tonight. I'm gonna trust everyone can hear me okay, see me and or my beginning of my slideshow here. But yeah, it's such a privilege to join you from Honolulu. This, for me, early afternoon, I believe later afternoon or early evening for you out there. And by the sounds of it, a bit cold. Not to brag, but I think it's about 75 to 80 here right now. Palm trees are literally swaying outside. Some of our century-old palm trees, in fact, that have been growing on the grounds here since long into this home's history. So as with other homes, I'm sure that are part of this series, other governor's residences, it's quite common for people to come from all around the world, all around the US to visit us here at this home on our weekly tours. So today is such a unique and welcome opportunity for me to bring a bit of the home to you, to visitors. Some of you, sounds like board members have spent a lot of time in Hawaii. Maybe others have never made it out. If you do make it to Hawaii, I hope you'll make Washington Place a destination to take a look at for yourselves. It's a free tour we offer here every week. This is a tax-supported residence. It is operated and managed by the state of Hawaii, Department of Accounting General Services, which is my employer. And it's just such a privilege to be able to be in this house day to day at Washington Place. At the very moment, I'm joining you from my office here, which, believe it or not, was for many, many years in administrations, the master bedroom of state governors. Here at the home, some of these bedroom areas have been converted into office spaces. And I point this out because behind me out the windows here, there is a second home that's on the property here that was built in 2002. And that is where the governors have resided kind of in their private lives and slept since 2002. So currently that's Governor Josh Green, First Lady Jamie Konani Green, and their two children. So I believe they're actually on a trip in Japan right now, fostering tourism for the state. But quite often they're just back there. So they're all on the grounds here at Washington Place, which to this day is collectively about 3 acres and is considered the governor's residence in its totality. Though I believe you should be looking at the slideshow with the depiction of the house, the front of the historic house. That is the building I'm in presently, which was home to Hawaii's territorial governors before Hawaii was a state, and its statehood governors up until 2002. On the front of the house there, you can see 3 flags. We have the blue, white, and red striped flag. On the one side is the Hawaii state flag. In the middle is the US flag, of course. And then on the right, the blue and red flag is the Office of the Governor's flag. So all 3 of those fly here designating the house's significance. But there are other people associated with this home, as was alluded to in the introduction. This is the only governor's residence that was once a home of a monarch, as the house existed well through the majority of the Hawaiian kingdom, the Kingdom of Hawaii being a sovereign nation that existed here, controlled all of the Hawaiian Islands from 1810 to 1893. And it was the last sitting monarch, Queen Liliuokalani, who called this home her personal residence for much of her life. And I'll be talking quite a bit about her. And she's a very important person to me and an important person to all the people of Hawaii. And her presence, her memory here is what is part of makes this job, my position here, such a privilege day to day, on top of the ability to just share a rich history of a home that sits really at the nexus of many key junctures in Hawaiian history. So for my talk today, what I'm really going to do is start by kind of zooming out and giving you a broad orientation to where I am, where Washington Place is broadly and within Honolulu proper. And then I'll kind of orient you to some of the key people that lived here throughout history and some of the early functions and developments of the house. From there, I'm going to take you on a tour of Washington Place. I debated actually carrying the computer around the house, but for the sake of maintaining a strong Wi-Fi signal, I'm going to keep it here. So I have a series of images to kind of take you through the house today, and we'll move through and talk about highlights and some of the ways different spaces have changed in the house here. And throughout all that, I'll underscore a lot of these kind of tensions that are here, that are felt daily between that early monarchy period and the statehood period that we're in now, as this house is always sort of straddling both those histories. And after the tour, I'm going to talk a bit about how Washington Place functions today and some of the significant events we've been able to host and witness here in recent times, before moving to a Q&A where I'll be happy to answer any questions you'll have. So, where is Washington Place? Let's get to see here. So I'm not sure how many of you have been to Hawaii. Of course, I'm way out here in the Pacific Ocean, 3,000 miles from the west coast of North America. And I didn't do the math, but several more thousand miles from where you're joining me today. So way out here, a common tourist destination, of course. But here, as you see in the corner, the island of Oahu, that's where Washington Place is based. This is the most populous island, Honolulu being on the south shore of that island, where most of the population of the state resides. In that map of the island of Oahu itself, you can see where Washington Place is. You can also get a sense of the really crucial harbors that are near it. And I'll get into the relationship between Washington Place and Honolulu Harbor. That's sort of the watery inlet you can see just near the red kind of dot. But just a bit further to the west there, between the towns called Waipahu and Aiea, that larger inlet is Pearl Harbor, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. It's famous story through the 1940s and in popular media and things like that. So Pearl Harbor is here as well, just a stone's throw from the main urban area of Honolulu. Now, in the most zoomed in image you see here, you see Washington Place in Honolulu amid some of the main streets that run through the downtown area and specifically the Capital District. You see the Hawaii State Capitol right across the main thoroughfare from Washington Place. That's Beretania Street. And that separates the governor's residence really from where the governor's office is. At the moment, the legislature is in session over there. Part of their annual session they hold to pass laws, several of which will surely end up on the governor's desk there on the 5th floor in just about a month's time. So for the governor, Governor Green, he really just has to get out of bed in the morning and walk out through the gate, and actually is often driven out the gate and down under a ramp that leads below the Capitol, where he goes to work there. So you really see the connection between the home and the current state of the government in its proximity to the Capitol there. But just kind of below the state Capitol, you also see Iolani Palace. Now, Iolani Palace, the only royal palace located within the United States, was the seat of royal power through the Hawaiian Kingdom era. Again, 1810 to 1893. That palace being the second one that was built there by the last sitting king, King David Kalakaua, in the 1870s and 80s. Now, Kalakaua was the brother of Queen Liliuokalani, whom he named as his heir. And when he passed away in 1891 and Liliuokalani ascended the throne, she was already living here at Washington Place. So she too had close proximity to the kind of seat of power in the kingdom at that time. So Washington Place has maintained this sort of proximity to those seats of power. The Hawaii state capitol was built only in the 1960s, and it's largely obstructed the view from Washington Place to the palace, just as the many buildings around us have obstructed the view to the ocean that you once would have had from the second floor here at the home. So I hope that gives you some kind of sense of where Washington Place falls in the context of Honolulu. So now we're going to go back and talk a bit about how Washington Place came to be here and its original construction and some of its earliest history. This image you're seeing now is the oldest known depiction of the home. It dates to the early 1850s. As you see, this is also Honolulu at the time. Looks quite different than some of that aerial map indicates now. And not just in terms of the large buildings around it, but also in terms of the roads around it and even the trees and the grass. This is the house emerges out of Honolulu becoming a real crossroads in the Pacific. While we think this area may have once been a lush kind of agricultural area used by Native Hawaiians, by the 1840s, Honolulu is becoming a major port of trade and very much so a hub for whaling in the Pacific. The British and American whaling fleets are using Honolulu and also Lahaina on Maui as their real kind of key sites of operation in the Pacific as they hunted whales. Into this mix are also coming merchants and traders. And one such merchant was a man named Captain John Dominus. Dominus was operating out of Boston and later New York, sailing around the Atlantic and up into the Pacific and trading in the Pacific Northwest and also in China at least once. And it was in 1837 he decided to relocate his family here. Came out here with his wife, Mary Lambert Jones Dominus, Boston socialite, kind of descended woman, and their young son, John Owen Dominus. And he set about building this house, as you see it very much depicted here, a symmetrical two-story Greek Revival style home, typical in New England and in the South and even in French Canada. Very atypical for Honolulu at the time, which was really emerging as a key village site and gradually into a proto kind of city. Although this structure would have been one of the biggest to be built at the time. It's built between 1842 and completed in 1847. You can see it as it has now, a white color to it. It had kind of a white or beige color then. And that comes on that first floor, at least in that brickwork you see, from the structure that was, the material that was used, which was actually coral block. A bit cheaper than bringing red bricks all the way around the ocean up into the Pacific. They cut coral instead right from the reef off Honolulu, in keeping with a practice that had been started by some of the New England based missionaries that started coming out here in the 1820s. So they used this coral block, but they also imported some wood from the Pacific Northwest and glass from back east as well. To this day, quite remarkably, the glass work through most of the first and second floor is intact from the 1840s. Always surprising, especially compared to the coral that we would expect to survive. The glass has also survived, a testament to this house's kind of endurance over time and through a lot of change. So this was the early days of the house when the Dominus family built it. Now, I need to add that while Captain John Dominus started building this house, he actually never saw it completed. His life ended quite tragically. In fact, in 1846, just before the house was completed, He also was tasked with furnishing it, and he would have the finest of furniture from China. And on one voyage to China in 1846, the ship he was on disappeared at sea. Captain John Dominus was never heard from again. So it was left to his wife, Mary, and their son, John Owen, to move into the house, which they did in 1848, showing much kind of fortitude and perseverance in the face of that tragedy. That tragedy was exacerbated as their two daughters, which they had left behind originally in Schenectady, New York, to be educated, both fell ill and also passed away. So this house, which was to be a home for a family of 5, was suddenly for 2 from its earliest days. Now, in this depiction, our second, you start to see some life in the home as Mary had started a gardening scheme. She's thought to have maybe began the first kind of Western-style home garden in Honolulu, beginning with red geraniums and planting trees on the ground, something that carried on greatly through the 19th century, and we perpetuate to this day. It's thought there could be 1 or 2 trees from her time still growing here, in fact. This is perhaps a bit romanticized image from this lithograph from 1854. But you see the house coming into its own. Looks like a gentleman in a top hat in the door there, unless it's the young John Owen, we don't know. But Mary very early on had to make ends meet without her husband in the picture, so she started renting rooms at Washington Place, and the home around this time became something of a boarding house. And one of the earliest boarders to live there was a man named Anthony Ten Eyck. He was the equivalent of the U.S. ambassador to the Kingdom of Hawaii. Now, this is the era of King Kamehameha III. He's the third monarch of the Kamehameha dynasty to rule over the kingdom. That man, that U.S. ambassador, suggested to the king that this home should have a name reflecting its American residence, its American kind of style, and he suggested naming it after George Washington. And it was Kamehameha III who issued a decree that the home should be known as Washington Place in all time coming. And so to this day, we still have that title in use for the house, even though it's changed in many ways over time. That's still the name we know it by. Now here you see the captain, John Dominus. He was an Italian-American, actually, probably from the northern part of Italy or thereabouts, who had immigrated to the US and naturalized in 1795. This is the only picture we have of him. As I mentioned, he disappeared at sea and was never able to live at Washington Place. And so it was his son, the bearded man here, John Owen Dominus, who grew up with the house, as it were, and became quite a prominent figure in the kingdom. He served as the inspector of horses for the kingdom. He also served in the royal court of Kamehameha V, and later in Kalakaua, King Kalakaua's court. He became the governor of Oahu and the governor of Maui when those were island by island designations. And he was so successful and apparently attractive in other ways that in 1862, one of the most high-ranking, prominent Native Hawaiian women in the kingdom accepted his marriage proposal. And that was a woman who had been known as Lydia Kamakaeha, later Lydia Paki, and eventually Princess Liliuokalani. She gained that royal title when her brother Kalakaua assumed the throne in the 1870s. You see her here as a princess depicted in quite regal form on one side of the screen. So as I mentioned, she married into the family that built the house. In 1862, she was 24 years old, and that began her time living here. Now, actually, she was born just a little ways away from us here, less than a mile away, to some high-ranking chiefly Native Hawaiian families, and was raised with a mix of Hawaiian education and culture, and also Western missionary style schools she attended. And it's perhaps in those schools as a girl that she had met John Owen, who's about 6 years her senior. So she spent most of her life at this home. Having come in 1862, she was here until this later photo was taken. This is 1917, the last year of her life. She passed away not long after this photo was taken, at the age of 79. This is her sitting on the front porch or lanai of the house in a chair that we still have in our collection. You see her dog Pony there at her knee. Pony means coronation. He's said to have been the king of dogs, in her opinion. So she spent most of her life here. Now, I would add that she had other residences around the islands, But she very deliberately stayed here at Washington Place through her life. Her time on the throne, in particular, 1891 to 1893, was very tumultuous and ended with the tragic overthrow of the Hawaiian kingdom itself. She was ousted by a group of white businessmen in the community who very much wanted Hawaii to be part of the United States. And they were ultimately successful in that, as Hawaii was annexed quite controversially in 1898. An action that remains controversial to this day, especially within the Native Hawaiian community. She decided, though, to stay at Washington Place through those later years as Hawaii became a U.S. territory. And in doing so, she was able to remain relevant, remain vigilant, and to fight to support her people and activists in the community who were looking out for Native Hawaiian welfare. And for that determination and so much of her other graces and her love and aloha, she is to this day a very deeply admired and loved person. And her life and her legacy connects so much to this house. 55 years she spent here, which, thanks to current term limits, no governor will ever match. And so I'll be talking about her as we start to go through the house and emphasizing the ways that her legacy informs its current reputation as well. I could add here that I often hear from about other governors' mansions, executive homes. They are always sort of at the whims of the public interest, as they are often tax supported. So while we all want our governors to live in a nice house, if someone comes to disagree with maybe policies of the day, they might be critical of improvements on that house renovations. Here in Hawaii, because this is also affiliated with the Queen, Washington Place, it gets a bit of a leg up in that everyone always believes the Queen's home should be well maintained, its pieces and collections well preserved. So Washington Place gets this sort of tug between its kind of reputational capital as people always want the Queen's things to be well taken care of. So the governor gets a little leeway in that. So now we begin our tour of the home. This is what it looks like when you walk in the home, or at least looked like in the early 1920s. The layout is still very much the same as this, but the 1920s mark the beginning of major changes here. As I mentioned, the Queen passed away in 1917, and that triggered the territorial governors living here, the first of which began in 1918. And by 1920, a man named Governor Wallace Farrington moved in and started to make major changes. He took down a lot of the walls that had once closed in the parlors you see on the left and right of the image here, and make it a much more open floor plan kind of design. Now, to the left of that image is this parlor that is the first one we see when we come in the house today. And this is a recent photo of that room. This is a room we call Mary's Parlor after Mary Dominus. It is set up to depict the earliest sort of iteration of the house, as it would have been perhaps her receiving room in the early days. As I mentioned, however, she very soon had to start renting rooms at the house. So original ideas and characters of the spaces had to change quite drastically. So this may have been a private room rather than a receiving room quite early on. Around the room, you see these French doors. Those do have, as I mentioned, the original glass. Uniquely, almost all of the doors have their own unique locks. And today we have very large sets of very historic keys. That's thought to have given unique access to the boarders who were staying in these rooms in those days. As you see the room now, it is made to look like a historic receiving room. And this reflects an effort that really started in the 1970s of the governors and the first ladies in particular of bringing the house back to its earliest qualities to help tell the story of the house. In this room in particular, First Lady Jean Ariyoshi made a lot of the choices on the aesthetics. She was also helped by the fact that much of the historic furniture was retained in the house through all of its life. So while this room really depicts the 1850s and 1860s, it does have a few period pieces from a little bit earlier and also a couple from a bit later. In particular, that table and bowl you see in the middle, that bowl is something we call an umeke. That belonged to the Queen herself, being a birthday gift to her in 1891. And we know from a photograph that she kept it on top of that table, so we do the same today. This is a depiction of her in that room when she used it as a study in the late 19th century, writing many of her famous works, probably at that desk there. Depicted on the wall are some pictures of her niece and her chosen heir, Princess Kaiulani. Across from that room, we have this room we call the Queen's Parlor, or the music room. The latter title being connected to this piano you see in the middle here. Now, when the Queen first moved into the house, she was, as a young bride in the 1860s, this was her mother-in-law's house. So it was really Mary Dominus's domain. And it wasn't until Mary passed away in the house in 1889 that Liliuokalani began to sort of bring in her own things and her own stylings. And so this space sort of represents that change where you have this piano that belonged to the Queen, made of koa wood, koa from the Big Island, that was sent all the way to New York City to be made into this piano for her birthday in 1891. And across from that, a beautiful koa couch or settee that was made for her as well. Between those two, you see that easy chair that I mentioned she's sitting on in that picture of her, the last year of her life. There are lei, these kind of garlands on that chair. We always keep lei on that chair in honor of her. And that's a tradition going all the way back to 1918 with First Lady McCarthy. You see a view of that parlor in 1910 here when the Queen did live here. You see the piano. That there in the center is that easy chair with a different upholstery job. Almost every other piece in this photo, we also have that rocking chair, some of the other pieces as well, rearranged slightly, but you get a sense of the continuity here. Now moving on, the last main social parlor on the first floor is this room we call the Blue Room. This room is also a representation of some of the ideas that were brought to the house by First Lady Jean Ariyoshi in the 70s. She envisioned this room as kind of a fine sitting room where there could be photo ops and handshakes with the governor and things like that. And it has this much more Asian style of furnishing. In fact, these furnishings you see, and in particular the settee right in the middle of the photo, are from the earliest collection of the house, in the house. That settee is thought to have been brought to the house by Captain John Dominus before he disappeared at sea on one of his successful voyages. It's been authenticated to have derived from China and was just fully restored last year. Now, in the back of the first floor, we have this room, our grand state dining room. This is an addition to the house from the 1920s, also from the Farrington administration. This room was part of the major add-ons to the house done in the 1920s. This was intended to be a place where dignitaries could come, meet with the governor, and be really a publicly facing part of the house. Unlike the front parlors I've shown you so far, this is a used room in the house to this day. Governor Green will host dignitaries in here. He recently had the Australian ambassador to the United States here. In past administration, we had many leaders from Pacific Island nations received in here for meals. This room has hosted over time many such persons. Many US presidents have dined in this room. FDR, Lyndon Johnson, Harry Truman, Richard Nixon, Bill Clinton, and others. Very famously in 1975, Queen Elizabeth II was received in here as well. Anybody who comes in here is under the watch of the Queen. You see her large portrait on the wall there depicted in her famous black gown she wore on a trip to England in 1887. And across from her there is her brother, King Kalakaua. So these two watch over the room, joined by a marble bust of all people, Empress Eugenie, the spouse of Napoleon III. Odd story on how that came in the collection. In a nutshell, the French tried to attack Honolulu in the 1840s, were quickly defeated. And as an apology for that failed attempt, Emperor Napoleon sent to Hawaii a portrait of himself and a bust of his wife. And so the bust has ended up here, thanks to one of the first ladies. The second floor of Washington Place, where this image was taken, is where the original bedrooms were. And these remained bedrooms all the way up until 2002, when that new residence was built on the grounds. This room today is one of our more prominent exhibit spaces, and the exhibition you see here was installed in 2022 for the home's 175th anniversary, a major benchmark in its history. And you see a display for the Queen, replica gowns of hers, books of hers that she owned and signed, things of that nature. To put a little bit of this area into context, when you come up the stairs, you're in this foyer area that leads to all these different bedrooms, which are different galleries. And we're so fortunate that much of the collection that is in these spaces to this day are items that belong to the Queen and passed down directly through her family. The Queen herself did not have any biological children, but she did adopt 3 children in her life. And in the historic photograph here, you see the 2 men on either side of her. Those are her 2 adopted sons. Now, adoption in a Hawaiian context isn't quite just the legal proceeding that we think of it today. It was a deep cultural tradition called hanai. The Queen herself had been hanai'd by a family when she was growing up, as a mode of actually giving her more rank and power, even though she had 2 able-bodied parents. So she did a very great thing by hanai adopting 3 children and thus passing on her power to them in a sense and giving them social standing, all 3 children coming from kind of less than ideal family backgrounds. The man that she's holding on to, however, her hanai son, John Aimoku, was actually a son of her husband that he had through a extramarital relationship. As she did the very noble thing of adopting him and giving that boy standing in the world. And that boy, John Aimoku, lived here in Washington Place on the 2nd floor and had 3 children here in his life. And those children have children that are alive to this day. And it is through them that we are able to welcome many of the collections into the 2nd floor. And one of those descendants is still part of our nonprofit arm, the Washington Place Foundation, that helps us with fundraising and supports our docent program and other things like that. So we're so grateful to have that direct connection straight to the Dominus family. To zoom out a little bit, I give you a little crash course in some of the different governors' families that have lived here. The large large family you see in the black and white photo in the top corner, that's the Quinn family. They were here at the changeover from Hawaii being a territory to becoming a state in 1959. They entered the house with 5 kids and ultimately left with 7, and also reportedly hundreds of rabbits that had burrowed all through the property that had escaped. Such are the happenings with some of these families. The Quinns, some of the youngest children in that photo, are still alive to this day and visit the home from time to time. Below them, you see in the 1970s kind of flashy shirts, 2 of the sons of the Ariyoshi family. All of these people depicted are still alive. Governor Ariyoshi on the side there in the suit just turned 98. And First Lady Ariyoshi, whom I've referenced a few times, very instrumental in building the docent program here and restoring a lot of the historic spaces in the home. And then their daughter in the center there. And then the largest photo here, you see a Christmas celebration in 1990 with First Lady Lynn Waihe'e. Lynn Waihe'e being spouse of Governor John Waihe'e, the first Native Hawaiian state governor. Here they are celebrating a Christmas kind of giveaway at the house. And Christmas is a very special occasion at Washington Place, as it's thought that the very first sort of secular style Christmas in Hawaii started at the house with Mary Dominus in 1858. So it's always been something that has been celebrated here. And every year at Christmas, we do an open house and welcome hundreds of members of the public in for tours and music and all kinds of festivities. At the home today, we have all kinds of different events and functions, from our weekly tours you can see depicted here to youth hula performances. These ones you see were part of our 175th anniversary, just on the kind of tail end of the real pandemic lockdowns that had shut the house down for a while. And then in the largest picture, you see what's called the Royal Hawaiian Band. That's a band that's been playing in Honolulu since the Kingdom period, very frequently performed here during the Queen's time, and continues to perform here on occasion. These are just a taste of some of the events that happen here. Many of the events that take place here are of a kind of official capacity, being delegations come to visit the governor. Just last week, we had a major delegation of several hundred from the Philippines here received for a reception. Many Japanese prefectures send their groups here to kind of restore ties, shore up connections between Hawaii and Japan. We had a 400-person Australia Day holiday party here recently. You can imagine the fun that was. And then all kinds of really playful things too. When Hawaii's Little League team won the World Series, I believe last year, they got to come here and sign a baseball with the governor and all kinds of things like that. So as this indicates, the governor today really uses this house as his public-facing home. And Governor Green in particular uses these event spaces quite personally to greet and welcome people into the house almost on a weekly basis. Each administration gets to sort of choose how they use the house because they have the separate residence. So some stay more private over there and others really embrace the home. At present, First Lady Jamie Kanani Green is the first Native Hawaiian First Lady in the statehood period. And so she has many connections to the Native Hawaiian community and has fostered a lot of cultural functions happening here, including a Hawaiian language workshop just last month. On that note, we recently celebrated a very momentous occasion here that I wanted to finish with by highlighting this flag you see on this display board here. That was the Queen's personal royal standard, a flag she flew when she lived here and was in residence here. When she was overthrown in 1893, that flag was taken from the home and was kept quite selfishly, to be honest, by a family that had taken it and not treated it very well. And it went to auction just last year, and the state intervened in that auction and was able to reacquire it. And so last year we had a very momentous repatriation ceremony at the home for that artifact that we were able to display with full Hawaiian protocols. You see some of the audience members out there in their traditional Hawaiian capes and other regalia. And the royal guards standing here that are a carryover from the royalty period. So this was a major cultural event we were able to have broadcast on TV and widely attended. And that gives a sense of some of the ways that there's still overlaps between the government that was essential in bringing this piece back and also the retained legacies from the monarchy period here at the house. So we hope that we'll be able to continue to welcome things back to the house over time, welcome the public to the house, and continue to be a site for cultural exchanges, for tough conversations, and for learning all about Hawaii's past from the kingdom period through the territory and the statehood period. And I'm happy to be here as part of the process of ensuring that can go forward into the future. So with that, I think I'll conclude, and I'm happy to answer any questions anyone has. And just thank you again so much for your attention and welcoming me into this space this evening.
Thank you so much, Travis. That was incredible. So now we can take any questions that you may have. Our rule here, if you've been here before, is if you could I will hand you the mic just so folks who are joining us virtually can hear, and our speaker as well tonight. So.
Thank you so much. Maybe starting from the very last screen, tell us a moment about the origin of the uniforms of the guards beside the flag. Thank you.
Sure. So this, there are a couple different groups in Hawaii to today carry on the legacy of the Royal Guard. There were several iterations of it during the Kingdom period. I should caveat that the Hawaiian monarchy itself was heavily influenced by the British monarchy. British having been in Hawaii before Americans really got here, starting with Captain Cook in 1778. And there were many connections maintained between the Hawaiian monarchy and the British monarchy over time. So you see influences from the British in all kinds of uniforms and other kind of trappings of the kingdom. So there's some little element of that in what you see here. This particular group is the kind of most prominent public royal guard. There are others affiliated with different monarchs. Exactly why they wear the uniform that you see, I don't know the specifics on the background of that, but it is in keeping with the style and the way that they dressed back into the Kingdom period, and certainly and probably most strongly connected with the era of King Kalakaua, as Kalakaua really built out a lot of the kind of visual side of being a king. He was very famous for creating royal orders, these kind of orders you'd wear on his person, and you see him depicted wearing many times. And so he very likely stylized or was the initiator of some of the styles you see. These guards you see here are volunteers, and they will go to many different royal functions. And they were happy to volunteer for this event. They actually were part of the procession that carried the royal standard here, all the way from the state archives several blocks away, to be presented here. So I don't have the most concrete answer for you on exactly what influenced their uniforms here, but hopefully a little backstory and context on the Guard.
That's great. Other questions? Sorry. Thank you.
Hi, thank you very much for your presentation. Lori O'Neill from Keller Williams Princeton, so I'm going to put my real estate hat on. How many bedrooms, how many bathrooms, and we would love to see the kitchen, because if you're catering events, it must be magnificent.
Good question. So that answer has changed a lot, or changes depending on what time you're talking about. Currently, in the first floor of the house, there are technically no bedrooms that were built in, though there is one bedroom used down there that I didn't show you. That's actually the Queen's bedroom. We don't generally depict it or share images of it very broadly, as it's actually considered a quite sacred space. It's probably the space where she passed away. She made use of the library and turned it into her bedroom on the first floor. When she got tired of going up and down the stairs, actually, she brought her bedroom set down there. On the second floor, there are 4 bedrooms in the main historic part of the house. And there are 2 additional bedrooms on this back side of the house, and I'm currently in one of those right now. So a total of 6 on the second floor here. It's funny you mentioned the kitchen, however, is when Washington Place was built, there was no kitchen, actually. No kitchen and no bathrooms in the house. For the bathrooms, chamber pots, an outhouse, and the kitchen was done in a traditional style of outdoor cooking. And originally, it's thought there was soon, it seems, a makeshift kitchen kind of added to the back of the house. And in the 1920s, a large sort of industrial style kitchen was added there. Now, that was early to mid 20th century, and it's kind of fallen out of its full functionality nowadays. So while we do have a lot of events catered here, they really use our kitchen area as a staging site. It's not very attractive to look at, so it's not on the tour. But it is large for staging, and 1 or 2 chefs will use the stovetops and things to prepare things. And that's quite a departure from some of the earlier governor's times, when they had large staffs, 9, 10 different housekeepers and private chefs that did their housekeeping and cooking for them. But nowadays, that's very much not the use of that space. And almost all events for meals are catered here. I should add also, I'm one of a staff of 3 here at the house. There's me, the curator, we have a director, and we have 1 housekeeper. The broader department we're a part of has kind of groundskeepers who maintain a lot of buildings. We have 1 dedicated groundskeeper who's here for the external spaces. And other teams come in from time to time. But quite a bare bones staff for the actual use of the space. And believe it or not, the First Lady is a very good cook and does all of her own cooking. She also makes desserts using fruit harvested on the property. Mangoes are dropping all around us right now, actually. And she uses those to make mango bread and things. And she'll bring them to us as gifts. And we're just like floored by this. So it's not always been the case here. But yeah, a lot of engagement with the property by this current administration.
So we have a question online here, and then I'll get to your question, Brian. We have a question from Elizabeth. Is this where the Queen was under, and this is in quotes, house arrest after she was overthrown?
That's a great question, something I glossed over a little bit. So the Queen was based at the Iolani Palace while she was on the throne. In 1893, she's overthrown. And she returns to Washington Place as that palace starts to be used by a provisional government of overthrowers. In 1895, there's a rebellion to reinstate her by a group of her supporters. She was accused of being aware of that plot to reinstate herself and was accused basically of treason, which many find deeply ironic, as treason was committed against her. But because of her awareness of that plot, she was charged with kind of aiding that plot and was then arrested here at Washington Place in 1895, which is a deeply significant moment in the history of the Hawaiian Kingdom and in her life. She was then taken back to Iolani Palace, and she was quite famously kept as a prisoner in her own palace for about 8 months in one room there, with very little opportunity to leave aside from using the bathroom. It's not a pretty part of Hawaii's past at all. Afterwards, she was allowed to return to Washington Place, which she writes very poignantly about the trees and the flowers being this warm welcome to her as she came back, and just greeted her and gave her a sense of kind of respite from that arduous time at the palace. She was then kept on a broader house arrest here on the grounds for the rest of the year, a few more months before she was pardoned. Her pardon being a condition of her formally abdicating the throne. I also add, she very quickly then set off and went straight to Washington, D.C., and she spent years in D.C. and quite a few trips advocating for the return of the kingdom, which President Cleveland was open to, but it ultimately never came to pass for her. But to get back to the question, she was kind of imprisoned at both spaces, but most famously at Iolani Palace. And if you ever visit Hawaii, you can tour the palace. They tell that story very meaningfully and powerfully, and show the room, show the quilt she worked on while she was there, and other details.
You mentioned the mango trees on the property. Can you talk a little bit about the gardens on the property and what's around the gardens and what's growing?
Sure. Yeah. Good question. So as you see in the image here, you see our towering pili nut tree. Pili nut tree. Pili is a South Asian or I think prominent in the Philippines, this tree. But this one was here actually during the Queen's time. And one of 3 trees that we associate with her time. Just in the top corner of the screen here, you actually see the coconut trees that I alluded to at the beginning, but you see a few other kind of scraggly branches. Those are of our tamarind tree. That tamarind tree was here during the Queen's time. There's a photo of her standing next to it in 1893 when it was already mature. So it's probably one of the oldest on the grounds. Behind that very towering pili nut tree, you can see the canopy of another group of trees. That's a mix of both mango trees and what's called paklan tree. A paklan is a member of the magnolia family. That paklan tree, which is kind of the one standing slightly over the eaves of the house there, that was thought to have been planted by the Queen or one of her attendants. So those 3 are some of the most historic. Of course, we have these mango trees. You see some of the other kind of lower palms and things that flourish around on the front side here. So on the front, it's really these trees and shrubs and things. On the back of the house that is really just behind where I'm sitting talking to you is a vegetable garden that is actively maintained. Actually, we had a horticulturalist out there while I was speaking from the University of Hawaii who comes weekly to work on it. And he works with the First Lady on cultivating the things that they want to grow and cook. I know they have like eggplant, chard, basil, all kinds of herbs, things growing there. To this side of me, which would be the right side of that photo, I believe, there's a large wall of bamboo that's really used as a security kind of measure. It gives great seclusion to that side of the property that otherwise would be very publicly visible. So it gives some privacy for the family. So a mix of things here. I should note that the Queen very famously walked around the property and just amazingly wrote down a full list of every single plant growing here in her time, hundreds of native Hawaiian, foreign flowers, trees, and left us this beautiful archive. So as we do replantings on the property, we often try to keep it within things she had growing here. In particular, we know things like bamboo were growing here. We know that these tamarind trees and others were here. So it gives us this great kind of roadmap for the gardens.
I think you just made a bunch of our garden history folks in the audience very jealous. That's a great treasure to have. Any other questions? Oh, we have one in the back here.
Yes, thank you for the presentation. One comment and a question. The comment is, you mentioned the lays on the armchair and Grover Cleveland. And Grover Cleveland is buried here at the cemetery in Princeton. One time I was there and there was a person who had laid a lay, and they're often shells. And they said they do that in memory of him supporting the royal family and not advocating for overthrowing them. So I just thought that was interesting. I haven't seen it. I haven't been by when someone else was there to do that again. But the question is, on that photo that you shared, is the only additional like extension to the house on the right side? So that whole left side is what existed originally?
That's a great question, and thank you. Yeah, the comment about Cleveland is interesting. He was a great supporter of the Queens, and it just so happened he was followed by McKinley, who had a very different idea of how Hawaii should be used. But I did mention that dining room that we went into was added by Governor Farrington in the 1920s. This area that kind of extends out from the house on the side with that kind of lattice work of it's actually glass windows. That's another 1920s addition. And that leads out to a further addition that was added in the 1950s. That's those furthest columns you can see. That's our outdoor event space there. So from those earliest pictures of the house, you saw it was a very symmetrical structure. It's gotten kind of stretched out further and further. The last edition, that 1950s edition, was a response to Territorial Governor King's inauguration being entirely flooded up to people's knees. So they decided at that time they needed to have a much more protected, covered area for their major events rather than tents. So we have those two areas that were extended, and one room just above that 1920s edition there that was actually originally added as a TV room for the governors, and today is a kind of a conference room that we have here, last used by Mrs. First Lady Ige in the previous administration as her office. So, good question.
So thinking about some of the earliest slides, the drawing rooms, the sitting rooms, this is kind of a sweeping question, so just whatever makes sense for you to address. What about some of the fabrics, where they were made, where the furniture themselves were constructed, anything of that sort that would give us a sense of the combining of what was done maybe locally and what was done imported from other places? Thanks.
Sure. I'll go ahead because I can, back to some of those early depictions here. So this earliest one, this photo here, a lot of the furnishings that you see throughout the house were actually made locally. Hawaii had a really robust carpentry industry, started first by some European immigrants, and then later taken on by Chinese immigrants in particular. That table you see right in the middle of the photo here, the base of it is thought to have been made by a German cabinet maker named Wilhelm Fischer. And the large settee, the kind of gold-colored settee next to it, the woodwork of that also made locally by Fischer. The tabletop, we believe, was made by someone else. Now, the chairs you see around the room, the standing chairs, many of those may have been imported. The one that's kind of closest to the pink settee facing the viewer, that was an original chair from the first collection at Iolani Palace. So a lot of these pieces made locally for sure. In this room, the large koa settee on the side of the photo made locally by a native Hawaiian woodworker, actually. So quite a good mix of locally made things here. As I mentioned, the piano the wood was sent to New York to be made. In terms of things like textiles, we recently did a deep dive on the wallpapers in the house and came to find that the wallpapers changed very frequently over time. We're trying to do some restoration work, and it's hard to, because you have to really pick and choose which era you're going to replicate, because they changed quite frequently. The wallpapers that we have now in this room and the other parlor across from it were choices in the 70s by Mrs. Ariyoshi, who had an interior designer work with her on that and the drapes. She also chose these carpets that you see here. All the carpets in the front three parlors were chosen in keeping with the 19th century styles that were there, but were products of the 1970s. So there's been efforts to get back to that 19th century look, but it is really a hodgepodge. But to go back to the original point, Hawaii is very proud of its woodworking history, and there are quite a few pieces that were locally manufactured, and very often from our most prized wood that's called koa. That is very expensive these days and very rare to get in large pieces. So to have large pieces of furniture made from that are part of what make these so special.
Well, thank you so much. Oh, did you have a question? Okay.
Thank you very much for your program tonight. And you mentioned that you're defending your dissertation next week. I'm just curious what it's on. Thank you again.
What is it on? So my research is really, I'm so privileged to be here at Washington Place, because my work talks greatly about the transition from Hawaii being a monarchy into being a U.S. territory. And while that political story is being increasingly well known, I note someone asked about the Queen's imprisonment. That indicates to me some of that people are getting to know this political story. People don't know so much the cultural story of how annexation took place on a social and cultural level. So what kinds of cultural happenings were there, in particular, what kind of scientific activities were happening in the kingdom, facilitating often the process of annexation. And I also looked very, very much so at Native Hawaiians who were engaging with culture, art, science, and kind of giving their own responses to that political change as well. So that's my elevator pitch. I hope that makes sense. But yeah, that's what I'm working on. And of course, as you see, the home's history crosses over through that very much so. And through my work, I've been so lucky to have the Queen's story enter it increasingly as I find that she was engaged in all of these moments as well.
That's excellent. Well, I know that that everyone here and online will join me, on behalf of New Jersey, and wishing you the best of luck on your thesis dissertation. Thank you.
Mahalo.
Thank you so much for being here, Travis. That was an amazing talk. And thank you so much for bringing these stories on the Native Hawaiian story, the story of Washington Place and its inhabitants to us today. We really appreciate it. And yeah, if you join me one more time in thanking you for being here.
Thank you so much. It's been quite a pleasure, and it's always a great privilege to speak on behalf of the House and to help share these stories more widely. So thank you again for your attention and your warm welcome and your great questions.
Well, thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone, so much for being here.